It lasted exactly 12 seconds. 12 seconds that would destroy a career, shatter a community's trust, and turn America's most beloved black entertainer into a pariah overnight. On September 15, 1972, at a campaign rally in Miami Beach, Sammy Davis Jr. walked across a stage filled with Republican dignitaries and did something that no black man in America was supposed to do. He embraced Richard Nixon. Not a handshake, not a polite nod, but a full, enthusiastic bear hug that was captured by every camera in the room and broadcast into the living rooms of millions of Americans. The photograph that appeared on the front page of newspapers across the country the next morning would haunt Sammy for the rest of his life. There he was, grinning broadly, his arms wrapped around the president who had built his political career on appealing to white voters' racial fears. And in that moment, Sammy Davis Jr. went from being a beloved symbol of black achievement to a traitor who had sold out his people for access to power. But what the cameras didn't capture, what the newspapers didn't report, was the story behind that hug. The months of pressure, the threats, the manipulation that had forced Sammy into that impossible moment. This is the untold story of how America's most talented entertainer was destroyed not by lack of skill, but by a single gesture that revealed the impossible position of being black in white America. To understand the magnitude of Sammy's mistake, you have to understand the America of 1972. The civil rights movement had achieved major legislative victories, but the backlash was fierce and organized. Richard Nixon had been elected in 1968 on what was called the Southern Strategy, a deliberate appeal to white voters, racial resentments disguised as law and order politics. For black Americans, Nixon represented everything they had been fighting against. The politicians who spoke in code about racial issues, who promised to restore order by putting black people back in their place. Supporting Nixon wasn't just a political choice for black entertainers. It was seen as a betrayal of the movement that had made their success possible. Sammy Davis Jr. understood this better than anyone. He had been one of the most visible supporters of the civil rights movement, performing at rallies, contributing money to organizations, and using his platform to speak out against racism. His relationship with the black community was complicated. Some saw him as too eager to please white audiences, but there was no question about where his loyalties lay, which made his appearance at Nixon's rally all the more shocking. The path to that devastating hug began 6 months earlier, in a private meeting at the White House that Sammy never wanted to attend. The invitation had come through intermediaries, entertainment industry executives who had connections to both organized crime and Republican politics. It wasn't really an invitation, it was a summons. The meeting took place in March 1972, in a small office adjacent to the Oval Office. Present were Sammy, 2 White House aides, and a man who introduced himself only as a, quote, political consultant, but whom Sammy recognized as having connections to the Chicago outfit. The conversation was polite, friendly, and terrifyingly clear in its implications. "Mr. Davis," the consultant began, "the President is a great admirer of your work. He understands the important role that entertainers play in shaping public opinion, especially in certain communities." Sammy listened carefully, understanding that every word carried weight beyond its surface meaning. "The President would be honored if you would consider supporting his re-election campaign. Your endorsement would carry tremendous weight with voters who might not otherwise consider voting Republican." The request seemed straightforward, but Sammy knew it wasn't. Nixon's political operation was notorious for its use of pressure and intimidation to secure endorsements. And the presence of someone connected to organized crime suggested that this wasn't just a political request. It was a demand backed by the threat of violence. "I appreciate the President's interest," Sammy said carefully, "but I've always tried to keep my entertainment career separate from partisan politics." The consultant's smile never wavered, but his next words carried an unmistakable threat. "Mr. Davis, we understand your position, but we also understand that your career depends on the goodwill of certain business partners who have their own political interests. It would be unfortunate if those relationships became complicated." The message was clear. The same organized crime figures who controlled much of the entertainment industry in Las Vegas and other major markets were aligned with Nixon's campaign. Refusing to support Nixon could mean losing access to the venues, the bookings, and the protection that had made Sammy's career possible. But there was another layer to the pressure that Sammy didn't fully understand at the time. The Nixon administration had been systematically targeting black political leaders through surveillance, harassment, and legal prosecution. Sammy's civil rights activities had put him on the administration's radar as someone who could potentially influence black voters away from Republican candidates. Supporting Nixon wasn't just about advancing the president's political interests. It was about neutralizing a potential threat to Republican electoral strategy. The pressure campaign intensified over the following months. Sammy found himself subtly excluded from certain entertainment industry events. Recording opportunities became scarce. Television appearances were mysteriously canceled. The message was clear: cooperate or face professional extinction. The final push came in late August 1972, when Sammy was approached by entertainment industry executives who had been recruited by the Nixon campaign to deliver high-profile endorsements. The meeting took place at the Beverly Hills Hotel, in a private dining room away from prying eyes. "Sammy," one of the executives said, "we need you to understand that this isn't just about politics anymore. This is about survival, your survival." The threat was delivered with casual brutality. Support Nixon publicly and enthusiastically, or face the complete destruction of his career and possibly his life. The same organized crime figures who had protected him for years were now demanding payment in the form of political loyalty. "All we need," another executive explained, "is one appearance, one rally. Show up, smile, shake hands, make it clear that you support the president. After that, you can go back to entertaining, and everyone wins." Sammy tried to negotiate, to find some middle ground that would satisfy his tormentors without completely destroying his relationship with the black community. But there was no middle ground. The Nixon campaign wanted a spectacle, a visible symbol of black support that could be used in television advertisements and campaign materials. The Miami Beach rally on September 15th was supposed to be a routine campaign event, one of dozens that Nixon attended during the 1972 election season. But the campaign had carefully orchestrated Sammy's appearance to maximize its psychological impact. Sammy was scheduled to perform before Nixon's speech, entertaining the crowd with a selection of his most popular songs. The performance went well. Sammy was a professional, and even under enormous pressure, he could still deliver a flawless show. But then came the moment that would define the rest of his life. As Nixon took the stage to deliver his remarks, he gestured for Sammy to remain on the platform with the other dignitaries. This wasn't part of the original plan. Sammy was supposed to perform and then leave the stage before the political speeches began. But Nixon's aides had orchestrated this moment carefully, positioning photographers to capture the exact image they wanted. Sammy Davis Jr., America's most visible black entertainer, standing with the Republican president. What happened next wasn't entirely Sammy's choice. As Nixon finished his remarks to thunderous applause, he moved across the stage greeting the various dignitaries. When he reached Sammy, he extended his arms for an embrace. In that moment, Sammy had two choices: reject the president's gesture in front of thousands of witnesses and television cameras, or accept an embrace that would brand him as a traitor to his race. Either choice would destroy him, but one would do it immediately while the other would do it gradually. Sammy chose the hug. The photograph that captured that moment showed Sammy beaming with apparent joy as he embraced Nixon, both men smiling broadly for the cameras. To white Republicans, it was a heartwarming image of racial reconciliation and bipartisan unity. To black Americans, it was the ultimate betrayal. The reaction was swift and devastating. Within hours, black newspapers were condemning Sammy's appearance at the rally. Civil rights leaders who had once considered him an ally issued statements distancing themselves from his actions. Radio stations that had played his music stopped adding his songs to their playlists. But the most painful rejection came from ordinary black Americans who felt that Sammy had sold them out for political access. Letters poured into newspapers and magazines expressing hurt, anger and disbelief that someone they had trusted could embrace the man they saw as their enemy. "How could he hug Nixon?" wrote one letter to Ebony magazine. "How could someone who performed for us, who we supported, who we bought records from, stand up there smiling with the man who wants to turn back everything we fought for?" The professional consequences were immediate and severe. The black venues that had been crucial to Sammy's career began canceling bookings. Record sales plummeted in black communities. Television producers who had once competed for his appearances suddenly found reasons to book other entertainers. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the loss of respect within his own community. Sammy had spent his entire career navigating the complexities of being a black entertainer in white America, and he had generally managed to maintain the trust of both audiences. The Nixon hug shattered that delicate balance permanently. The attempts to explain or justify his appearance at the rally only made things worse. Sammy's publicists issued statements about his commitment to bringing people together across racial lines, about the importance of engaging with political leaders regardless of party affiliation. But these explanations sounded hollow to people who saw the embrace as a calculated betrayal. The truth about the pressure that had forced Sammy into that moment never became public during his lifetime. He couldn't reveal the threats, the coercion, the impossible choice he had faced without risking even more severe retaliation from the criminal and political forces that had orchestrated his appearance. So Sammy was left to bear the blame alone, branded as a sellout who had traded his integrity for access to power. The isolation that followed was profound and painful. Sammy continued to perform, but often in venues where he had never appeared before. Smaller halls, white audiences, Republican fundraisers where his presence was appreciated, but where he felt like an outsider. The black community that had once claimed him as one of their own now treated him as a pariah. The white community that had applauded his Nixon endorsement accepted his performances, but never fully embraced him as one of their own either. Sammy had become a man without a community, too black for white America and too compromised for black America. The psychological toll was enormous. Friends reported that Sammy became increasingly isolated and depressed in the years following the Nixon rally. The man who had thrived on applause and adoration found himself performing for audiences who tolerated him rather than loved him. The 1972 Nixon hug had accomplished exactly what its orchestrators intended. It had neutralized Sammy as a potential political threat while simultaneously destroying his credibility within the black community. It was a masterpiece of political manipulation that turned a weapon into a victim. When Sammy Davis Jr. died in 1990, the obituaries mentioned his talent, his success, and his groundbreaking achievements as a black entertainer. But they also mentioned the Nixon hug, the moment that had defined his later career and overshadowed his earlier accomplishments. The tragedy of Sammy's story isn't just that he was forced to make an impossible choice, it's that the choice itself was designed to destroy him regardless of what he decided. The pressure campaign that culminated in the Miami Beach rally was never about securing his genuine support for Nixon. It was about demonstrating that even the most successful black entertainers could be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed by the same forces that had created their success. The hug that lasted 12 seconds had taken a lifetime to orchestrate and a lifetime to recover from, and in the end, Sammy never really recovered at all. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that in America, being black meant that even success was conditional, even acceptance was temporary, and even the most talented entertainer could be reduced to a symbol of betrayal by forces beyond his control. The photograph of that embrace remained on file in newspaper archives and political museums, a permanent reminder of the moment when Sammy Davis Jr. discovered that there was no safe harbor for a black man in white America, not even at the very pinnacle of success.